Manpower has been the major advantage Russia has held over Ukraine for the entirety of its invasion. To Vladimir Putin, it's always about the numbers. If Russia can just field more of everything, then it will eventually wear Ukraine down to the point where it's forced to capitulate. That's the theory. But as Russia just discovered, that theory doesn't work when you are running out of soldiers. Deep in Zaporizhia, Russia's forces are faltering, and it's down to manpower issues, which have led to Putin's most desperate move yet. He's not sending soldiers to the front lines. He's sending cooks. On September 12th, Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, or HUR, released an intercepted radio transmission that revealed something startling about Russia's forces. Fighting on the Huliaipole front, which is in Zaporizhia, those forces are much weaker than Putin would ever want anybody to believe. So weak, in fact, that Russia is now ironically being forced to feed the Russian military's cooks into the meat grinder that Putin has created in Ukraine. According to the Kyiv Post, the intercepted call took place between a Russian soldier and his commander, revealing plenty about how the Russian military is now operating in Huliaipole. The call starts with the soldier practically begging for assistance that he likely knows will never come. "I can't start moving, my knees are so weak, I can't even step on them," the soldier says over the radio. We don't know if this soldier was exhausted or had been injured in the fighting against Ukraine's troops. To the Russian commander on the other end of the line, it doesn't matter. He responds with biting sarcasm and a complete lack of regard for the soldier that he's supposed to be leading. "And you forgot where our evacuation team is?" the commander asks sarcastically, almost as though he's admonishing a naughty child. "You suggest the company commander to take the wheel and go roll you around? Do I understand you correctly?" Immediately we see the callous nature of command in the Russian military, and to those who know how Russia operates, this complete lack of care for what may be a wounded soldier shouldn't come as a surprise. Brutality lies at the core of the Russian military. The Center for European Policy Analysis, or CEPA, noted this in a March 2024 piece, where it highlighted that the brutality and strange behavior so often seen in Russia's military is no anomaly. It's Kremlin-approved, designed to weed out the weak, and has existed since the days of Soviet-era leader Joseph Stalin. Brutality, destruction, and looting are vital elements of Russian military doctrine, CEPA writes. They've existed as a pillar of Russian military doctrine for almost 2 centuries. Policymakers should take note that revanchist powers do not play by Western rules. They disdain not only the taboo against wars of aggression, but also the rules by which wars are fought. While these words highlight how Russia is all too happy to inflict brutality on anybody who opposes it, much of that brutality is both inflicted on Russia's soldiers and encouraged by the Russian military. CEPA says that the Kremlin's history shows us that Russia is all too happy to pay its soldiers with the blood and bodies of conquered people, but in return, those soldiers must become the brutal embodiments of death that Russia expects them to be. According to CEPA, that's why Russia's soldiers are drawn from a society where domestic violence is high, murder and spousal rape are common, and where the decriminalization of violence against women has created generations of men who believe that violence is always the answer. This emphasis on brutality explains the callous nature of the Russian commander in the leaked call. There is no room for those perceived to be weak, whatever that may mean, in Russia's military. The Kyiv Independent highlighted this in a June 1st report where it said that a group of Russian soldiers who had recently been taken into captivity chose to surrender because they feared the abuse they already faced more than the idea of being held by Ukrainian captors. The outlet noted that Russia is known to use a gulag style of abuse to keep its soldiers in line and to punish those the military deems as offenders. Russia's military even has entire punishment squads that exist to seek out soldiers who refuse orders, abuse alcohol, or are simply disliked for whatever reason by their comrades. Those targeted soldiers are subjected to beatings and in some cases are placed into confinement pits. We tell you all of this to give you some much-needed context to the words of reply delivered by the sorry Russian soldier's commander. This is what military life is like for Russia's rank and file. They are only valued based on their utility, with any injury or malady being grounds for abuse rather than the help the soldier needs. But the commander wasn't finished. As his subordinate tried to respond, claiming that he didn't mean that his commander needed to come and rescue him, the man on the other end of the line lost his temper, and in his fit of rage, he revealed information that will have boosted the confidence of the Ukrainian fighters in Huliaipole. "You were told to f***ing go so far, get there on your own, and from there maybe they will take you. There are no f***ing people, everyone has left. The cooks are already going into battle because you can't f***ing win," the commander roars. Hold on a second, the cooks are going into battle. If there was any doubt about potentially mishearing those words, the Russian commander furiously follows up, berating his soldiers while unintentionally revealing the true state of Russia's forces in Huliaipole to HUR. "They brought the cooks here, they brought the communication operators, they've already f***ing killed them, come and f***ing take you," the commander spits into the radio. It's a foul-mouthed rant born from frustration and Russia's brutal military culture, but it's also a revelation. The cooks are out of the kitchen and dying on the front lines in the Ukraine war. Russia is desperate, at least in Huliaipole. This city isn't one of the most well-known in the Ukraine war, though it has been a target for Putin's forces practically since the beginning of the invasion. During those first few weeks, Russia's forces pushed deeper into the southern part of the Zaporizhia Oblast, of which Huliaipole is a part, reaching the outskirts of the city. There, the advance was stalled, with the front lines stabilizing just south of Huliaipole by mid-2022. Since then, Russia has been hitting the city hard. Since May 2022, shelling in Huliaipole has been an almost daily occurrence, with residential buildings, cultural centers, and much of the city's civilian infrastructure having been reduced to rubble. Lowlights of Russia's seemingly non-stop campaign to take Huliaipole include a series of air and artillery strikes in June 2022 that were supposed to break Ukraine's defensive line in the city. Those strikes failed. Ukraine ended up pushing back, managing to retake some territory surrounding Huliaipole in the process. In January 2023, during the supposed Christmas truce called by Putin, Russia betrayed that truce by launching about 230 artillery shells into Huliaipole. That attack was followed up by yet another failed offensive against the city, leading to Russia's soldiers once again being pushed back and stalled out. Russia continued the shelling and assaults into mid-2023, at which point Ukraine launched a counter-offensive through which it hoped to retake Zaporizhia. That counter-offensive, much like Russia's attacks on Huliaipole, failed, returning the front line just south of the city to a stalemate. And so it has gone for Huliaipole ever since. Russia keeps on shelling. Occasionally, it will launch an assault that results in all of the soldiers it sends into the attack getting killed. Slowly but surely, Russia has been feeding its soldiers into a meat grinder of its own making. Occasionally, the shelling does some damage that really hits home. A strike in August 2024, for instance, decimated the Huliaipole local museum. As sad as Ukraine would have been to see that building burn to the ground, it had already long since removed the exhibits the museum once hosted, meaning Russia's symbolic victory was far less than it would otherwise have been. Nothing has changed in Huliaipole since the early weeks of the invasion. In April, tsn.ua published a report in which it said that around 1,000 of the 12,000 people who had once called Huliaipole home still live there. Those who've stayed behind do everything they can to keep the war-torn city clean and inhabitable. A police officer named Vyacheslav Shaiko explains that the Huliaipole community comes together to help the vulnerable evacuate. Yesterday, we evacuated a young woman who had been living here. When the airstrikes began, people realized that everything was being destroyed completely, and they had to leave. Many elderly residents, grandmothers, grandfathers, have started to leave en masse, Shaiko told TSN. The point here is that Huliaipole is a target for Russia. It has been since the beginning of the war, and Ukraine's long-lasting defense of the city has taken its toll. Huliaipole hasn't fallen, and its defenders have claimed so many of the Russian troops dedicated to taking the city that Putin is desperately calling on cooks who've never fought before to head into the fight. You can guess what happens to those cooks. Just like everybody else who attacks Huliaipole, they die. HUR was quick to point out what is now happening in Huliaipole. In an official post published to its website, where it revealed the contents of the leaked call, HUR said that it's not just the cooks who are being sent to fight as part of Russia's assaults on the city. Drivers, signalers, drone operators, and even the seriously ill are being pulled from their posts or hospital beds to run headlong into Ukraine's fire. They, along with the cooks, are cannon fodder Putin is using as a last-gasp attempt to take a city that has eluded him since he launched his invasion. HUR sums the situation up nicely. Russian troops are suffering catastrophic losses due to the professional actions of the Ukrainian defense forces and their own incompetence, and the mobilization campaign is not bringing the expected results, HUR says. Not bringing the expected results is an understated way of saying that Russia's latest attempt to advance on Huliaipole has failed. As UNN notes, this latest leak reveals that Russia has run out of ideas for the city. Years of artillery barrages haven't worked, neither have airstrikes or coordinated ground assaults. Now Russia is resorting to throwing everything, including the kitchen sink and the soldiers who used to man it, into what UNN calls exhausting meat assaults, where commanders treat their subordinates as expendable material. Ukraine can see all of this, and it's throwing salt into Putin's Huliaipole-sized wound. HUR wraps up its post, revealing the contents of the leaked call with a message that will cut Putin to his core. The main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reminds, every Russian soldier who does not want to die in meat assaults or to be wiped out by a commander has a chance to save his life. To do this, you need to write to the bot of I Want to Live project on Telegram, it says. This is clever by Ukraine. HUR knows that it's talking to people who shouldn't be on the front lines with this final part of its statement. We've already discussed how the brutality of the Russian military has led to many of its soldiers surrendering in the past. Now Ukraine is giving the cooks, and everybody else whom Russia has sent to fight and die in Huliaipole, a way out. Surrender now, live to see tomorrow. This isn't a new tactic from Ukraine. In November 2022, the BBC reported on the creation of the I Want to Live project, which officially started in September 2022. The project essentially acts as a hotline that Russian soldiers can access via Telegram rather than via phone, meaning there is less chance of them being caught as they attempt to surrender. Within the first 2 months of the program being active, Ukraine had received 3,500 messages from Russian military personnel or their families, showcasing how many of the people that Putin sent to die for his cause have never wanted to be there. Though thousands have made contact, most don't ever get to officially surrender to Ukraine via the hotline. In June 2024, the Defense Post reported that around 300 soldiers had officially managed to surrender in the nearly 2 years since the program's inception. It's difficult to determine why there is such a disconnect between the number of Russian soldiers who inquire and the number who actually go through with surrendering. In many cases, it's likely impossible for Ukraine to get the soldiers who want to surrender, especially if those troops are behind the front lines or are pushed into one of Putin's meat assaults before they have a chance to lay down arms. Others may send their messages in moments of weakness, only to decide that it's better to stay with the Russian military and risk death in the fight than to be discovered as somebody who wants to surrender and have to deal with the punishment that follows. Regardless, HUR's promotion of the hotline in the wake of revealing the leaked call shows us two things. The I Want to Live program is still active, and Ukraine believes there is clear appetite for surrender among many of Putin's forces. The applications keep on coming. By October 2024, Canal 13 revealed that around 40,000 of Russia's soldiers had applied to the I Want to Live program. Though most will never make it into Ukrainian captivity, this shows us that many more Russian troops than you might expect want to get away from Putin's war. Now, those in Huliaipole are being afforded that opportunity. We wonder how many of the cooks and other non-combatants currently being forced to the front lines are going to take Ukraine up on its offer. Those who don't are just going to be fed into the meat grinder, contributing to a problem that is affecting Russia's military far beyond Huliaipole. This single city shows us that Russia is dealing with a manpower problem that is being masked by official numbers released by Russia itself. On the surface, it shouldn't seem like any area of the front should be a problem for Russia, thanks to its high levels of recruitment. On September 8th, the Kyiv Independent laid these numbers bare, revealing that Russia has managed to recruit 280,000 contract soldiers so far in 2025. That number comes from HUR itself, and the 280,000 means that the Kremlin is ahead of its target of recruiting 343,000 soldiers into its military by the end of 2025. All of those soldiers are receiving bumper payouts for their services, including a one-time signing-on fee of around $24,000. But if you dig a little deeper into these numbers, you start to realize how desperate Putin is becoming. The Defense Post touches on the subject in its own report on HUR's revelation, noting that the deputy head of HUR, Vadim Skibitsky, has revealed that a large portion of the 280,000 soldiers are coming from places a typical army wouldn't want soldiers to come from. About 25% of this number today are people who are in prison, under investigation, and against whom criminal charges have been initiated, Skibitsky revealed. He also noted that around 1,200 North Korean soldiers are expected to arrive soon, as part of a total of 6,000, and that there are soldiers from other countries signing contracts with the Russian military, essentially acting as mercenaries under Russia's command. There are two things that these numbers really tell us. First, Russia is recruiting so heavily, not because people want to fight in Putin's war, but because Russia is losing soldiers so heavily. That's obvious from what's happening in Huliaipole. Cooks wouldn't be on the front lines if Russia's manpower situation were good. Casting a wider net over the whole war, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance reveals that Russia has lost over 1.09 million soldiers to death, injury, or capture as of September 15th, showcasing one of the reasons why Russia is recruiting from anywhere it can. Scores of soldiers who were part of the military at the beginning of Putin's invasion are gone, and Russia is desperately trying to fill the gaps they've created with warm bodies. Second, think about the people who are now fighting on the front lines. Beyond the cooks and drivers who are taking up arms instead of doing their actual jobs, there are criminals. North Korean soldiers assigned to Russia by their dictatorial leader, and foreign soldiers who are more interested in the payday than they are in Putin's cause. Russia's leader knows that many of his people don't believe in what he's trying to do. That's why tens of thousands are trying to surrender to Ukraine, and it's also why Putin is trying so hard to avoid mobilization. Cast your mind back to September 2022. In that month, Putin announced a partial mobilization of Russia that pressed around 300,000 of Russia's people into military service, the New York Times reported at the time. Even in Russia, where state control is the norm, this move sparked massive protests. At least 1,252 people across 38 cities were detained by Russia for protesting in the wake of this partial mobilization. The message was clear. Russia's people may claim to support Putin, but they don't want to be forced to die in his war. Now, 3 years later, the memories of those protests will haunt Russia's leader. The war he started has raged for far longer than he expected, and it's cost the lives of hundreds of thousands. If he were to attempt to mobilize now, the protests Russia saw in 2022 will seem like child's play compared to those that happen in 2025. Putin knows that his people wouldn't accept the mobilization. That's why Russia's leader is so desperate. It's why he's dangling massive contracts, paying far more than the average Russian wage in front of people, damaging Russia's economy in the process. It's why he's pulling so heavily from Russia's criminal element, sending dangerous people into Ukraine that most other militaries wouldn't trust. Putin's fear of mobilizing is why he's welcoming soldiers from North Korea, which is one of the few nations that is even more of a global pariah than Russia. And that fear is why cooks are now fighting on the front lines in Ukraine. It's better to send those cooks to their deaths, delaying mobilization a little more, than it is to admit that Putin's strategy of bleeding Ukraine dry has hurt Russia just as much, if not more, than it's hurt Ukraine. In Huliaipole, the Russian offensive appears to be on its last legs, leading to desperate times and desperate measures. Yet Putin seems ignorant of that fact. So ignorant that Russia is starting to use language against another nation that is very similar to the language that it used against Ukraine prior to the invasion. It's the ultimate irony. Russia accuses Finland of invasion plans as it ramps up the rhetoric to lay the groundwork for a future invasion. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for coverage of the latest developments in the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.